Hi there, and welcome back for a video about the nitrogen cycle. In our last video, we looked at the carbon cycle. You'll see some similarities in the nitrogen cycle, but we're talking about two different elements in these two videos. Carbon and nitrogen are different elements. When we get into chemistry, we'll talk about what elements are, and I'll show you a periodic table. You'll see that carbon and nitrogen are neighbors on the periodic table, but they are different substances. So I want to zoom in on this diagram. This is a pretty complicated diagram. It's a little more difficult than the one we saw last time. So let's take a second and figure out what this diagram is saying to us, and then we'll look at our questions. So the title of the diagram is the nitrogen cycle. And anytime I see cycle, I think of a circle. It's something that repeats itself over and over. You will see arrows again. These are very important arrows. And I think before I even get started, I'm just going to go ahead and look at my arrows. So I'm going to take a green highlighter, and everywhere I see a down arrow, I'm going to highlight that in green. So you can follow along here with me. Let me get a thick highlighter. So here is a down arrow. And that's not really enough of a thickness to, let me go this way. Here is a down, here we go. There's a down arrow. Here is a down arrow. Here is a down arrow because it makes the curve that's coming down. Here's one. Here's one. Okay, here's one. There's one. There's one. There's one. There's one. So get your mind fixed on the down arrows. And then let's just ask ourselves, what do those down arrows lead to? Where do those down arrows go ultimately? Well, the down arrows are putting nitrates into the soil. And you might be thinking, well, I thought we were talking about nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen, nitrates, those are related. So that is okay. It's not the same word, but they're relatives. And I won't go into the difference just yet. But just know that you can use those interchangeably in this diagram. So the down arrows, the green arrows, are showing me all the ways that nitrates can get into the soil. So let's just number them so we can read them. Number 1 is lightning. When lightning occurs, that is putting nitrates in the soil. Another way is by fertilizers. If you grew up on a farm, you probably have seen fertilizers that contain nitrogen. And I want to point out to you right here, this is a British spelling of the word fertilizer. In America, we spell it with a Z instead of an S. Excuse me, I had to have a drink. So fertilizer, in American English, that is a Z or a Z instead of an S. Okay, so that's a second way. Here is another way. The bacteria in roots and in soil put nitrogen into the ground. Here's another form of bacteria. When things die, they produce that bacteria. So I would say that death produces this bacteria. So I'm going to count all of these as one step. The cow dies, the plant dies, the cow poops. All of those things are putting bacteria into the soil, which is putting that into the earth. So all of those sort of relate to the one thing, the bacteria. Okay, so we have identified all of the pieces that are green. So now let's go the other way. Let's figure out how nitrogen moves up. Okay, so one way is that roots of plants absorb nitrogen. So they're pulling that nitrogen up into the plant. Another way is that bacteria pull the nitrogen out. So some bacteria put it into the ground, some bacteria pull it out of the ground. So the bacteria release that nitrogen into the atmosphere, and that is where, oops, that didn't work. That is where it comes into the clouds, and then will return in the form of lightning and also bacteria. So bacteria play a very major role here in the process of the nitrogen cycle. There are lots of factors in this cycle. With the carbon cycle, it was a little simpler because there weren't so many sources to consider. Okay, the one other thing that I want to point out to you is that nitrogen in the air is in the form of N2. And we're going to draw a molecule in just a minute. There is one other arrow that is not an up or a down. Okay, so we need to take note of that, and that's right here, where the cow eats the plant. So the cow is getting nitrates from the plant because the plant got nitrates from the roots. The cow is eating that plant. So when the cow dies or the cow poops, that is also putting nitrogen in the soil. It's putting bacteria in the soil that put the nitrates in. So the plants are not really an up or a down. They're sort of a sideways factor here. But the cow eats that plant, and that puts nitrogen in the cow. Okay, let's take a look at our questions. How does nitrogen enter the soil? Well, entering the soil is a downward motion. So we're looking at our green path. Well, one way was lightning. And see, we've already numbered those and marked them. Fertilizers, and I'm going to use the American spelling. It doesn't matter. The third thing is bacteria. Another thing is death and decomposition. The cow and the plant died. The poop is not alive, so it's decomposing. So we'll include both of those. And I think that covers it. There are four basic: the lightning, the fertilizer, the bacteria, and then death and decomposition. So that's into the soil. Then this question is asking how nitrogen gets out of the soil. So we're talking about that upward motion, the red ways. And we had a couple of those. One, I should have labeled, it's absorbed by plant roots. And two, denitrifying bacteria. So I'm going to say absorbed by plants. And comma, bacteria. And I'll tell you what, that's a little bit hard to see. Let me draw a line between those questions. I thought I numbered them, but I guess not. So here is the third one. I want us to draw a molecule, so it has to be connected, of nitrogen 2. So what's that saying? Well, it means that I need 2 atoms of nitrogen. So let's draw an atom, and we'll name him nitrogen. And then let's copy. It needs to be exactly the same. The atoms are identical. So we have 2 atoms of nitrogen, but if we want a molecule, we have to bond them. We have to put them together. So draw a line to hook them together, and you have 1 molecule of N2, nitrogen 2. And remember, nitrogen 2 is what we see in the clouds. Okay, that takes care of that diagram, and I believe the next lesson is on the space terms. It is, so we'll move to that one in just a minute. I will stop this video and start another one.